So first of all, what is neurofeedback?
Neurofeedback is a safe and easy way to teach the brain to improve what it does.
Well, why would I want to do that?
Well, most people have a little bit of glitches in their brains, and as I always say, who wouldn't want a better
You've
brain?
been reading my diary.
This is a tough culture to live in. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure for performance, and there's also, we're very good at messing up the brain in this culture. And so the better your brain functions, the better you function. And so my passion is really to help people have their brains function better so that they can function better and lead fuller, happier, more productive lives.
What is neurofeedback? How does that work?
Well, the way it works is we monitor the brain waves, and we that information goes to an amplifier, and then it goes to a screen, and we look at that screen and we set the parameters to reward a mix of brain waves that, based on our assessments, we expect will improve functioning. And then it's all about reward. It's like teaching your dog to sit. I call them brain yummies. It's all about reward. It's a very safe way to teach the brain. So what happens is when the brain is doing what we want in all of the locations that we're teaching at one time, there's a reward. And it's usually a change on the computer screen and a simultaneous sound. If we make it too exciting, then we're driving the brain into a much more involved state. And what we want is we want the brain to learn how to get itself into that state, because the problem is that brains either have a tendency to be inactive in various places and therefore can't do the control stuff they ought to be able to do.
So let's give a very specific example so people know exactly what we're talking about. The way that I learned about you was I was wanting to help someone in my family who was on the autistic spectrum, who still is on the autistic spectrum, but is so different now in his functioning. And so I had spoken with another physician who said, you know, if you want to do something fantastic for that little boy, bring him to Dr. Ross, because she can train him to stop some behaviors that are getting him in trouble in school. And this is a little 8-year-old boy. And so talk about how that works. You know, what happened? We brought him in, and what happened?
Well,
I know, but they don't.
The first thing that happened is I did an intake. So an intake is all about what are your goals? What is it that you want to be different? What's the history? And what's this person like? Lots and lots of questions about current functioning, so that I get a really good sense of, so what is going on with this brain? What's the history of this brain inside this person, and so forth, and where are we headed? The next thing that happens is I do an EEG, we call it a brain map. It's electronic. We use a cap, and I attach, I get these sensors so that the sensors all work the way we want them to work, so we have a good connection.
And I happen to have a whole bunch of slides here,
Yes.
which I'm going to show you right here, right now, but we're going to have them up on the screen for people. So here's a typical kind of map, or I don't know what you would call that, a brainwave.
Well, these are brain waves, and what we do is I collect data, this information, through this cap that's attached to my computer, and I have the person do various things. We call it various states. So I have them with their eyes closed, relaxed, and in this case, this is someone with their eyes closed, relaxed. I have them read, I have them do math, I have them watch a silent video that pulls for social competence, which is really important for people on the spectrum, for instance. If there are reading issues, then I have them do something that helps pull for reading.
And I remember we did a whole bunch of different...
We did a whole bunch of things.
Like math and
Exactly.
reading and social interaction and
different states.
comprehension and...
Yeah. Because we want to know, can the brain turn itself on? Can the brain control its own state? And if it can't, then where are the problems and what kind of problems are there? So in this particular slide, what we're seeing is, go back, what we're seeing is someone whose brain kind of goes along, twiddling along, so to speak, with the brain waves. Everything's going fine. All of a sudden, the brain waves get really, really huge.
Right in the middle, I see.
Right in the middle there. And when that happens, that is a moment of inactivity, significantly reduced activity. And that's when the brain is unable to process the information coming in. And when a person experiences that, and you can experience it for a lot of reasons, but when you experience it, for instance, you might be reading, and you'll get to the bottom of the page, and you won't know how you got there. You won't remember what you read, even though your eyes were seeing it, and so forth. And you also have what I call a working memory dump. So what was in your memory is now gone. So now you've got to go back and reorient yourself a couple pages ago, even though
I wish
it
that
only
never happened
lasted
to me.
this brief moment.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. And then you have another way of showing what the functioning looks like. And there's this colorful map here, which I thought is a really cool way, because this side is not so good and this side is good.
Much better.
So
Much
describe
better.
the two sides. So the not so good side with all the blue.
Well, let's go back. We're looking for a couple of things. We're looking for activation in locations, and that's really about size of brain waves. So what we just saw is someone whose brain waves suddenly got huge. It's also possible to have overactivation, and that way, under those circumstances, the brain waves are just too small, and you can't get at your brain. You can't get at those parts, even though they're going. It's like they're going a mile a minute, and you can't get at it. So that's one of the parameters we look at. And then the other parameter we look at is we're looking at coordination across cortex. Cortex is this layer that covers the rest of the brain, and it's all wrinkled up so it can fit. And it's the biggest on us humans, and it's about the most advanced of our functioning. And it's also about control. So what we're looking at is we're looking at how well do each of the locations that we tap coordinate and co-vary with each of the others. And on the left-hand map here, what we're seeing is a lot of dark blue, and dark blue is not enough coordination. So this is a person that's challenged with various things, and again, it depends a lot on location of where this lack of coordination is. And then on the right-hand side, we're seeing what this person's brain looked like from a coordination perspective after a lot of sessions of neurofeedback.
So the lighter colors are showing more coordination. That green and the kind of yellowy green is more coordination.
Exactly. And this is the same person we saw before who actually had a seizure disorder. So for us to have gotten this person's brain to function this much better with no medication, and given the severity of the seizure that this person was experiencing, the seizure episodes, was very exciting.
And so now we have this other slide that shows 3 different states. We've got these red lines, blue lines, and this other thing going on the bottom.
Little stuff on the bottom, yeah. The little stuff on the bottom actually looks very small because these other brain waves are so enormous. This is a little boy who is on the autistic spectrum, PDD-NOS actually. And what we see is the red is represents the brain waves when we did his first EEG, before his first brain map, before we did any training. And he's got like 240 microvolts of this slow wave going on, 2 to 6, which is enormous. And what it means,
when it should really be is what?
Oh, it should be way down around 25, 30.
And it's 240, wow,
yeah,
that's quite a
it's
difference.
ginormous, absolutely ginormous. So our job was to teach the brain to make this smaller and also get that coordination going. And so what you can see if you look at the blue is, although he's not down to totally normal for his age, the change is enormous. I mean, he's, at this point, it's, what is that? That's about 60 microvolts
versus
as
240.
Compared to 240. So what happened for this particular child is he had a lot of trouble with transitions and various of the kind of things that you would expect for someone on the spectrum, and he ended up moving to the other coast and handling it beautifully.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And so people come for things like autistic spectrum issues, ADD, ADHD. Tell me some of the other things that this kind of therapy helps.
Brain injury.
Where what happens because of the brain injury?
Actually, they can often look like ADD. That's very, very common. And it's very common for people to come in who say they have ADD, and what the story is, the way they got it, could be a brain injury. It could be what I call a birth story. It is very, very common that a child with ADD will have a birth story where something was funky about the birth.
They didn't want to come out and they were forced out.
That it could be
No, I'm
that.
kidding.
I mean, it could be too long a birth. It could be too short a birth. It could be meconium in the fetal waters. It could be a moment of hypoxia.
What do those things mean to someone uneducated like me?
Basically, it's stress on the infant. That's really what it's about. It's stress on the fetus. And when you have stress on the fetus, this is a very important moment. I mean, birth is a very, very important moment. And in fact, if you want a little bit of psychotrivia, the measure most highly correlated with success in adulthood is APGAR. So the better you come out, APGAR, that's the number. They actually give a newborn a number anywhere from 0 to 10 a minute after birth, and I think it's 5 minutes after birth. And the better your number, so the closer to 10 or 10 that you have, then the better you were, so to speak, the healthier you were at the moment of birth. And that's most highly correlated with success in adulthood.
Wow.
So what we often see, although sometimes APGARs are just fine, we often see that there was a prolonged birth which put stress on the infant. Too fast can sometimes be just as bad. There are various things that can happen that tell me, okay, this is a birth story. And the good news is how much we can do for a child who's got a birth story. And it really is just another variation, in a sense, of head injury, in that there's a disruption in that very important moment. And that disruption can affect the brain. It doesn't always, but it can. And what we want to do is we want to maximize a person's brain functioning.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you haven't quite said yet, which I was really thrilled about, is that neurofeedback has as good results, if not better, than a lot of medication.
Absolutely. One of the things that fascinates me, I've been doing this for almost 15 years, is the longer I do it, the more I see how very efficient our culture is getting at disrupting frontal lobe function. Frontal lobe function is all about executive functioning. It's about attention, it's about focus, it's about switching from one thing to the other, it's about memory. This is not a good thing, and so we really focus on frontal lobe function, and frontal lobe function is also about behavior, impulsivity, and social competence.
And so if you strengthen the frontal lobe, if I could say it in plain English,
The front part of the brain.
Then what you do is you give people a lot more options for their behavior.
Absolutely.
As well as ability for all kinds of things. So, for example, I can remember coming to visit, and there was a kid there who was working on retraining his brain for sports performance.
Yep. Yes.
How did you figure that out?
Well, actually, that's what I love to ask kids about, because you have to get the kid to buy in, let's face it. So if a child has a sport, then it's really easy for me, because all you need in a sport to do better is a little bit more focus and a little bit better physical coordination. And we're able to do that. And another thing we're able to do, interestingly enough, depending on what we see on that EEG, that brain map, is often, we're seeing more and more of this, problems with the functioning of the eyes. Not the visual acuity, not is it fuzzy or not fuzzy, but the functioning of the eyes. Do the eyes work together? Are they able to accommodate so you can see far away and then close and make that change quickly enough? Can the lens adjust quickly enough? That sort of thing. We can see that on our EEGs.
If that's
and
off,
we can improve that.
If that's off, how would one know it? Like, what would they be experiencing?
That can very much be part of dyslexia. We see that a lot in reading problems. So reading problems can be, interestingly enough, in this area, which is about language. It also can be in this area, which is about vision, and it can be most dramatic and most challenging if it's in both of these areas. So
And
you have that combination.
And this neurofeedback
can enhance that, can improve that.
Wow.
Also, we see visual problems in attention and focus. How are you going to attend if you're not seeing well. Basically, vision trumps everything in the brain. So most of our mental resources, I call it mental money, is going to go towards vision. So if your brain's putting a lot of mental money into vision because the system isn't working easily, then you're not going to have enough mental money to put into those frontal lobes that are all about executive functioning and
when you say
attention and
executive
focus.
functioning, in English, what does that mean?
Again, it's
I'm
about
gonna be a
it's
leader in my
about
company.
initiation, as in starting things. It's about inhibiting, which is stopping things. So it's about inhibiting those impulses, so it cuts down on that impulsivity. It's about switching from one thought to another, one activity to another. People get stuck in one and then they can't switch. So they get sort of this compulsive style, or they get a very rigid style. Memory is a very, very important part of executive functioning. Organization, knowing where your stuff is, making sure you bring your stuff home that you need. Organizing your thoughts, organizing what you're going to write, what you're going to say, holding it in memory while you say it. This is all executive functioning.
That's awesome. And this has even worked for people who are getting into those years when memory is not. Wait, where did I put my keys?
Normative, what's it called?
There we go.
Yeah, I can't remember. Normative cognitive decline of aging is what it is called. So it's considered the norm in this culture. And it doesn't have to be the norm.
Right.
It's very, very possible to get your memory back. I had a 70-plus-year-old gentleman who had been a very high-powered executive, started his own business, etc. And he used to like to play piano at odd hours and learn new sonatas, and he couldn't memorize them anymore. He just couldn't do it. So he came in for that. So a little bit of neurofeedback, and guess what? He's memorizing sonatas again.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
And so in case people are wondering exactly how the training works, let's show those other slides that we have. And there's a picture of a patient with this,
There's going to be a reward. And what happens, the way behavior, any kind of behavior works, is any behavior that's followed by a positive event, the chances of it happening again increase.
Right.
And it's that simple. And I think that's the hardest part to understand about neurofeedback, is that it's simply about reward, that it's totally safe, and that reward works.
And it's seamless and invisible, which is really fascinating.
And natural, so you don't have to work at getting your brain to work better. The way I put it is you don't have to grit your brain's teeth. You just have to be, your brain does all the learning, and things just work better.
That must be our brain calling right now.
I got that. Absolutely.
So what I really found fascinating, and what I love, is seeing Ben go in. You've got this catalog of pictures that he can choose whatever he wants to see. And so on this next slide, we've got a picture of trees and kind of an outdoor scene on the bottom right. But on the top left are what people begin to see as their brain waves are doing what they're supposed to do.
Right. So what they see initially is they see a blank screen. So picture it on the left, that screen on the left, without any little squares in it. And for every quarter of a second that the brain is doing what we ask, based on, we saw those squiggles a moment ago, the way we said it, there is a square that comes up. I call it a puzzle piece.
Yes.
And it's a piece of an image. So on the left, you can see this is a piece of that full image that's going to come up later on the right. So people like to sit and they like to guess where the next square is going to come up, or they like to try and guess what this is going to be. So that keeps them engaged. And then after, depends on the number and how old the child is or the adult or whatever, after, let's say, maybe about 10 of these squares, the full image comes up along with a ta-da. But every time a square comes up, there's also a sound.
So they get rewarded by that sound.
Sound and a change, a visual change.
Got it. And the ta-da is the major reward.
Is the major reward. And the brain accepts this as reward.
Do you know I can hear it? Isn't that funny? I know that sound. I know the sound when the whole puzzle comes to life because I've sat there with him.
Absolutely.
That's so funny.
And what's interesting is the brains like change. They like stimulation. I remember in freshman psychology, they had an experiment where they had, in those days, they had wooden mazes, and they had 2 wooden mazes, and they would run rats through the mazes, and these mazes were exactly alike except for one little thing. One of the mazes, had stripes, and the stripes were painted this way. And on the other maze, they had stripes, same size, painted this way.
Oh.
So, which maze do you think the rats ran faster in?
I'm guessing where they were continuous and went around, but.
No,
Ah.
exactly the opposite.
And how come?
Because from a rat's point of view, if the stripes are
Oh.
vertical, things change. And
So-
so they ran faster because they were being stimulated by the environment.
Interesting.
Brains like stimulation. And that's
Boy, I
one
feel
of-
that one.
Everyone does. Everyone chooses the other one. It's the way people see things. But anyway, so the brain really likes stimulation. So that's one of the reasons that this works the way it does. We also have another screen that some of our people really, really like, and they get to see their own brain waves, and they see sort of snippets. So they'll see a snippet for each location we're working on. And they also, so we can tell them, okay, we're trying to get your brain waves to be small inside those lines, so they can kind of use their intention as well in a much more direct kind of way. And then when that location is doing what we want, there's a green disc that comes up. And when all the discs are full, ta-da! And some people really like that feedback screen as well.
And the other thing is they don't really have to do anything. The brain takes
brain-
over to do what it needs to do.
Exactly.
So even if they weren't trying to make it appear or trying to do anything, the brain does its own work without feeling like it's work. I mean, sports training, by training your brain without pumping iron or, and I know
Well, this
that.
is pumping iron for the brain
Yeah.
because we're literally creating new neuronal connections. And so we're making the brain more robust, except it's the easiest learning your brain will ever do. It's the easiest learning you'll ever do.
And so here's another example of the difference after training. And this is just showing
Yes.
one of those diagrams.
Yeah, one of those little circles. So the one on the left, that green dot, is the location itself. And the blue surrounding it is the rest of the brain. And what we're seeing with that dark blue is those are the areas where there is not good connection. And this is a frontal location, actually. And so it's extremely important that that location be in connection with the rest of the brain so it can do its coordination and control job. So on the right, what we see is this same location, and we can see a lot more of the other colors, light blue and green and even yellow. That tells us that this location is coordinating with much, much more of the brain.